Okay, so back from the discussion that we have heard for this roundtable, where we have an innovator and business angel and Professor Goldin, Oxford University, an expert of the impact of globalization on various things, including innovation, and formerly at the World Bank and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So, few concepts on which I would like to get some discussion. Building blocks. One, of course, now I think it's in a way Phelps versus Schumpeter, okay? So this is all right. Innovation is endogenous and interactive and not directly related to R&D by a linear relation. Of course, R&D is not irrelevant, but you cannot assume that by pushing on R&D you get innovation. Fair enough. The problem with this was raised by Charles Calomiris. This view does not establish a relationship between productivity and innovation. That is missing from the picture. Indeed, Ned himself in previous work established that you can have highly productive countries that are not dynamic. So we understand. Here there is a missing link. Second building block relates to the puzzle of the end of catching up in post-World War II economic history. Abramovich had stressed the role of social capability in explaining rapid catch-up in the early experience post-World War II. Basically, what he meant at that time was an educated labor force, educated with the right skills, which were low-skilled technical knowledge to be able to manage this mass production medium intermediate technology plants, which was what was needed to introduce mass production to Western Europe and Japan. We know that in Western Europe catch-up stopped already in the late 70s. In Japan, there was another decade of run. Apparently, we understand now their continuous model innovation was basically an organizational model, in fact, invented elsewhere because it's invented in the West. But Japan had the right culture to apply this model, which produced the Toyotas and the Sonys. The idea that you could give at that time control of the production chain to a unionized communist worker in Italy was out of the world. But it could be done in Japan. At all events, catching up stopped well short of full convergence with available to the production frontier. And we recognize that basically wage and welfare demands started to exceed productivity growth, and probably they played and made the economic systems in Western Europe, for instance, much more rigid, and probably this is a big part of the story of why catching up stopped. The third building block is, let's say, Nelson's plus Hall and Soskise varieties of capitalism. Basically, the idea is very strong that national institutions shape, that innovation is related to national institutions, shaping the interactions between economic agents in the market and the rest of society. These institutions adjust slowly and endogenously in response to changing world economic environment. Hall and Soskise, at the beginning of the noughties, 2000s, called our attention to the different coordination model in liberal market economies, where the coordination between different agencies is arm's length in the market, and coordinated market economies, where coordination takes various informal relational channels, and the main expression of this is corporatist arrangements that Ned is also so well studies. Now, the critical aspect stressed here is that there is a strong complementarity of institutions. So if the labor market is rigid, you cannot have an open capital market. Simply, you cannot throw out people of work unless And then the capital market is also closed. You cannot accept free takeovers, for instance. So strong interrelation. The main innovation in this regard in Europe, of course, was in the 90s, and it was flexi-securities. And then you got high social protection and innovation coming back to this society, organizational innovation, the ability to handle new technologies. This is pointing to a key role of what? Of the institutions that we use to insure against the risk of losing our job, of becoming sick, and of aging and losing our income. These are the critical institutions apparently to determine dynamism in economics. And my final building block is education and skills. Crucial aspect for innovation is the ability to cope with the need to change rapidly and to cope with the new technologies. Already in the late 70s, Jan Tinbergen maintained that the evolving distribution of income may increasingly reflect not class struggle, but a race between schooling and the evolving technology and market environment. Angus Deaton, recently laureated Nobel Prize, last year Nobel, has called, in this sense, our attention to the rising premium paid in the market to high-skill education. He has seen that as a sign that the supply of education is running behind demands from the market. And the dual of this is the fact, is not only the increase in inequality. I was very relieved when Calomiris destroyed the idea that it was finance. That had made me very nervous now. But Charles Calomiris destroyed those resurrections, so I'm back to my reason for inequality, which is this education falling behind technology and globalization. And this explains increasing social resistance to change and demands for protection and redistribution, which of course affect adversely innovation. I turn to Professor, these are my building blocks. Maybe I got it all wrong. Let's see how it goes. Professor Goldin.
Thank you very much. It's a huge pleasure to be here and have this extremely daunting task of addressing capitalism and innovation in the West in 8 minutes. Clearly, there's an enormous diversity in the West, wide disparities between and within countries. But what the West has in common, I would suggest, is that it is not wild. It is tamed, it is regulated, it is advanced. And so when I think about the West, I think about the opposite of the Wild West. Unlike finance, which has been tamed by political masters, the innovation machine is much more complex. It is much more difficult for politicians, regulators, and others to shape innovation. In many respects, it is a complex, dynamic system which is above and beyond politics. It is shaped clearly by history. It is shaped by historically determined factors that one can influence, but influence in very slow ways and in unexpected ways. Education systems, cultural systems, legal systems are different to financial systems, and of course the entrenched interests, the evolution of law, the evolution of norms and standards are different. One can change competition policy quickly, one can change a patent regime quickly, but changing an innovation system quickly is not easy. One of the great complexities is thinking about why within any national country, where the same standards of law, regulation, and politics apply, one has such enormous differentiation in legal, in innovation systems. The case of North and South Italy was mentioned early. Why is Milan so different to Naples? Why is Detroit so different to Palo Alto? Why is London so different to Sheffield? Why is Oxford so different to Cambridge in its innovation capabilities? Why is Shenzhen different to Shanghai or Beijing? And I think that needs to sober us in making generalizations about national systems. In many respects, what these instances reflect is something we've known for a very long time, which is place matters more than politics when it comes to innovation. This we learned from the Renaissance. This we learned from many other examples of great leaps in innovation over time. And the great irony of the current period of globalization, where ideas travel more freely and further than at any period previously in history, is that place matters more, not less, despite the fact that ideas are the classical, non-limited, non-regulated basis of globalization. So this puzzle of getting the place right, of ensuring one can make a cauldron in which ideas are cooked at the local level, becomes more and more important. We need to understand how it is that these wonderful great cities particularly are so effective at it. And part of the reason is that they become magnets for great people, for innovative people. And the role of migration, domestic and external, I believe, is underestimated in many of these debates. It's something I discuss at some length in my book, Exceptional People, how migration shaped our world and will define our future. If it is migration that provides one of the unexplained variables, then factors which shape migration, like internal labor markets, like housing markets, like transference of professional standards and skills between states, for example, in the US, becomes more important in shaping the dynamism of a society than national and other regulations in other respects. But it's not just national migration within a big country like the US, it's of course migration between countries that shapes innovation as well. And when we look at the data, trying to explain why different places are innovation cauldrons, this factor of migration looms much more significantly than is dealt with in the debate. Why is this? It's because not only migrants are risk takers, more than the average of society, but also the diversity which migrants bring is a key ingredient of innovation structures. Think of all the iconic firms in Silicon Valley and try to think of one that is not first or second generation migrant founded. This is not an accident. This is because that's what migrants do. Peter Thiel, by the way, might be an example, a counterexample. I don't know enough about his background. But even Steve Jobs, of course, as a child of a migrant. So migrants are extremely important, and the question then is this related to why cities are so significant? And it is, because all the big cities which are the most significant innovators are the cities with highest shares of migrants. And of course, this becomes endogenously determined. Let me turn briefly to a number of other topics that have been discussed this morning. One is the role of the state, and the role of the state, particularly in funding early stage deep research. My concern here is that I think short-run politics, driven and accentuated by austerity programs, is leading to a very negative situation. When one thinks about the big innovation machines of the past, not least in the Renaissance, one is struck by the role of people like the Medicis and the state in creating public goods, in supporting artists, creators, and others. This has happened in the past, of course, here, where we have projects like the Manhattan Project and others. Public goods which then, for the bomb, now for new energy forms, etc., are vital. Antibiotic resistance is probably one of the biggest threats that we all face. And unless antibiotics and the antibiotic innovation machine is changed, and that will require private sector investment, changes in competition policy, and many other determinants, but also deep research. X Prizes, innovation that's driven out of the private sector can take one's at great distance, but it will not address the public good, which is vital. It's also very important to recognize that not all innovation is about goods. Much innovation is about bads. And the big challenge of the innovation machine going forward, and the reason I believe this is such a vital topic, is we need to accelerate the goods against the bads. ISIS is an innovation. It is using social media in the most effective way since any organization, and has more foreign recruits than any organization since the Spanish Civil War. ISIS is an example of an innovation bad. There are also many other innovation bads, taking biopathogens and creating new pandemics which can kill us all using DNA sequencing could be the biggest bad we see out of innovation in a long time. The destruction of great firms through innovation, like Bearings, Lehman Brothers, and others, is another example of innovation bads. So we need to ensure that we leverage up the goods, that we ensure that the creativity that comes out of this collective connection, 4 billion more literate people in the world today than 30 years ago. Random distribution of creativity, I believe, determines that we will have much more creativity coming into the world over the coming years. This is the great puzzle of the suggestion that innovation is slowing down. Where is this emergence of individual genius and collective genius? In other words, diverse teams working around the clock to find new cures for cancer or whatever, in the way that this new innovation machine allows. More scientists alive today than all the scientists that ever lived in history. All of these statistics one hears about. More PhDs being produced than all the PhDs that ever lived in history. Where is not the flying cars, but where is the innovation to show for it? I'm an optimist on this. I believe it's in the labs, I believe it's coming, and I believe it will fundamentally shape our lives. I also believe that we're not understanding innovation right, and this was hinted at by someone earlier who said, my iPhone can load the PowerPoints now, I don't have to write on a transparency and put it up. There's innovation in process, and Ned talked about this when he talked about what's happening in a nurse changing processes in a hospital. It's happening and it's spreading more rapidly, but we don't see it necessarily. It's emerging. I believe we're in the period of the most rapid innovation the world has ever shown. We are in a new renaissance. And for the reasons that the Renaissance was created, which was the transformation of ideas from handwritten scripts in Latin in monasteries with less than 1% of the world literate, to a world where suddenly millions of books and political pamphlets were printed, we're in a new world where these similar spread of ideas are accelerating. But as the Renaissance showed, it did not lead necessarily to the things we imagine it did. It led to religious wars. It led to ages of setbacks for Europe. And so the question of our time is, are we better at ensuring that the great ideas that flourish are the ideas that win against the bad ideas which flourish too? And that's why I believe Ned's book, Mass Flourishing, is such an inspiration for all of us. Thank you.
Please, Mr. Rose, tell us if whether all this makes sense for a business angel and innovator on the camp.
Well, I find this entire conference absolutely fascinating. You know, there's in children's TV things, there's a show, one of these things is not like the other. And the one of these things that's not like the other is me. So everybody here in this audience is an academic or a theorist working with large institutions, and I'm a business type person. So what am I? I am not an inventor. And the whole theory and question of invention versus innovation has been the leitmotif going through the writings of Ned and going through the entire center here. But I would posit that there is a third piece that is absolutely critical, and that's one of two things that we have to use to readjust our thinking. Invention is creating something new. That's the thing that happens in the lab, the mad scientist, whether it's done by a brilliant inventor, whether it's done by a team. That's the new creation of intellectual property. Then you have innovation, which we have all been using here and seem to be accepting the definition of invention applied to something that actually changes something over a long period of time and has an effect on society. And I would posit that the one thing that is missing in all of this discussion, and the thing that is absolutely vital, is the question of entrepreneurship. What is an entrepreneur? Who is an entrepreneur, and what role do they play? So let me give you a little bit, just 2 seconds on my background. I am a third-generation entrepreneur. I started my first company when I was about 10 years old. I've started half a dozen companies all the way through school, high school, graduate school, and after getting out, I then turned this into a business angel investor. I've invested at this point in well over 100 companies, 100 other entrepreneurs creating new types of companies. I wrote the book on business angel investing, which is the standard textbook in the space. So I eat, live, and breathe entrepreneurship. I mean, my daily life is around these people. And what I will tell you, and something that I don't think is obvious, or even as you're aware of it if you're in the world of academia, that entrepreneurs are different species. It's a completely different person. I founded the entrepreneurship program at Singularity University. I'm on the entrepreneurship advisory boards here at Columbia and at Yale and at several other places. And I have decided, after looking at entrepreneurs for years and years, that entrepreneurship is a spectrum. Some people would never in a zillion years start anything new. Other people want to go out and start something right away. And so I think on a scale of 1 to 100, it's a spectrum, and then at the last 1%, there is what I call an air gap. And there is just something fundamentally different psychologically, intellectually, spiritually, emotionally, genetically about that last 1%. And these people are these entrepreneurs. And so there's the great man, 19th century great man school of history, which posits that the major changes in culture and society were the result of an individual person. Then there are the multiple discovery theories that things happen because of cycles in time and in multiple places around the world. I would posit a new theory. I am positing the entrepreneur school of history. It's not the one great man. It's not the one Thomas Edison or Alexander the Great, nor is it things happening around the world at the same time because of changes in God knows what. I would posit that it is that 1% of the population, those entrepreneurs, and those are the people who take advantage of innovation, of new invention, and make something happen. And I think the clue here is what we just heard about migration. Migration, I absolutely agree that it is critical to think about that domestically and internationally, but that's just a clue, because think of what that means. Who is migrating? It's the friggin' entrepreneur who is migrating. It is the person. So we were talking about innovation and entrepreneurship in Italy. So I was a few months ago keynoting the Worldwide Web Developer Conference, their entrepreneurship track over there. Italy is not known for tons and tons of modern high-tech innovation over there. But when I was there, there was the entrepreneurship track. So there were several dozen entrepreneurs who were pitching their new developments, their new businesses. And you know what they wanted to do? They all wanted to get the heck out of Italy and come over here. They showed up in my office a few months later, on their tour of the U.S. to see how can they, move their companies here and start. So the entrepreneurs are the people, the individuals who take these new inventions, and they are the critical component of innovation, of applying this. And it's not just brilliant technology, it's services, it's a new way of thinking about things. And that is the one core piece. The other core piece that also has not been baked into our consciousness is the question of the exponential growth of technology. This is the ultimate book in this subject is Ray Kurzweil's book, The Singularity is Near, which posits that what we know of as Moore's Law, where technology is advancing, doubling every 18 months, that this is a universal factor, according to Kurzweil, that it's been happening since the beginning of the planet, that technology effectively, once you normalize it, has been doubling since we were unicellular organisms. And so what that means is now that we have passed so it maps to a power curve, which looks like this. You can't see it, you can't see it, you can't see it. It begins the Industrial Revolution, it begins to change over here. You get to the 19th century, the 20th century, and all of a sudden it becomes wham. And you have the technology is going like this. And so when you're talking about flying cars, absolutely we're going to have flying cars. You're going to have self-driving cars today. Your Tesla can self-drive. You're going to have complete self-driving cars down the streets of New York City within 5 to 7 years. You're going to have all kinds. Ray Kurzweil's latest prediction is you're going to have little micro nanobots in your brain that'll tie into radio waves and tie into Wikipedia, and you'll be able to have, whether it's technology-enhanced humans or humans-enhanced technology. And the whole concept of the singularity is that's when computers and humans merge. and you have spiritual machines, or you have technology-enhanced humans. And you know when that's projected to happen? In 2045. That's 30 years from today. So you take this extraordinary growth in invention and technology on the one hand, and you take the entrepreneur, that 1 in 100 person who is changing society. And if in a 350 million population country, that's think about how many, 3.5 million entrepreneurs, and they are the ones who are taking these new inventions and changing society. So I would strongly suggest that we all think when we're looking at prescriptions for society and institutions, everything comes back down to, can you make it easy and viable and possible for entrepreneurs to function in a free market capitalist society, because that is how you get to mass flourishing.
That was fast, very fast. It's
Really,
15 minutes intervention in 7 minutes. Congratulations. So we have 3 concepts open for discussion. The first one is, of course, entrepreneurship, but all you say, these Italians are going to a place where they can find the right environment. Okay, first, right. Second, so the right place, and places working as magnets. And I think a very strong evidence, a very strong concept. And third, you raised, for I think the first time in this discussion, with the exception of finance, the idea that policies may be able to select. And this is tricky, of course, because why would governments know? But we understand that somehow bad things may happen out of rapid innovation, and good things may happen, and we may need somebody able to choose. Open discussion. Yes.
Yeah, question to David. You are referring to entrepreneurship as a phenomenon that we have had all the time, but we are observing also a rapid growth of more and more entrepreneurs. Probably the 1% that you are referring to is more like 2% to 3% now in the new generations to come. And the US being the major source also of people who are willing to risk small amounts of money into all these entrepreneurs as a new form of investment. Would you try to elaborate a little bit on what could be the reasons why all this boom in entrepreneurship is coming from? And what could be the anticipated effects in terms of relationship of a new form of finance vis-a-vis banking as a new financing way of innovation?
I take another question. Incidentally, banks, we want them to reduce their returns, right? So what we are doing to them is producing new forms of intermediation. And many large banks already have lending as a very small part of their balance sheet, less than 20% in Standard International. So thinking of banks as the way to get the credit may be not any soon. Another question.
There's one.
Yes, Ms. Mann.
So I have a sort of a variant on the other question, which was, if it's 1%, then you can't teach them. Entrepreneurs are unique, and you cannot teach them because they either are or they aren't. So that's my first question. But if that's not true, then there are people at the margin who might be an entrepreneur in the right environment, but if it's not the right environment, they won't be an entrepreneur. So which of those is the relatively more important one? Because if it's the latter, then we can talk about policy changes, we can talk about an educational environment, but it's the former, you either have it or you don't. Country and person.
Last question. Yes, please.
To what extent is it actually important to distinguish between entrepreneurs and innovators? Surely the entrepreneurs that you're talking about mostly are the ones who are also innovators. So it doesn't really matter so much how many mom and pop stores are opened or how many new restaurants that kind of serve the same stuff are opened. It really matters as to whether those entrepreneurs happen to be implementing some kind of new innovation, some kind of new invention. And it's also just, I think, worth cautioning against this focus on business creation, because a lot of innovations are applied in existing firms or even in governments. If you think of the Second World War, a lot of innovators were brought in from around the community, and they implemented a lot of their stuff in government, which then kind of leaked out into the wider sector. Yes, so I guess that's just a caution against it. I'd just like to get your view on to what extent does it matter as to whether we have entrepreneurs per se, or is it that we need more entrepreneurs who are also innovators?
Professor Goldin,
I think all the questions were for David.
this is why I asked you to react.
My question was actually to David as well.
Well, you decide, 2 minutes.
Yeah. I think there's a number of points. One is entrepreneurs often build on the work of scientists and deep research, which is the sort of background research that state does. And they harvest it. They are, I think of them as the harvesters. But there's nothing to harvest if the background worker. There'd be no internet without DARPA having built the infrastructure and thought about it, et cetera, et cetera. And so both are necessary, and I see these as extremely complementary goods. And sometimes they set up as sort of oppositional. You need entrepreneurs, you don't need state funding of research or something, and I think that's misguided. The second is I would slightly question the Kurzweil phenomena. Kurzweil's great, he's an inspirational man, but he's not a leading global scientist. No scientist I've heard that knows about the topics he's talking about think that what he's predicting is likely to happen. So, and I've spoken to many about exactly these issues. Of course, there is exponential growth, but the idea that you're going to be downloading your brain in a fixed year like 2045 is regarded by many people as science fiction. So I think we should see these opportunities as incredibly open and incredibly exciting. There's clearly a huge amount happening, but I would caution against hooking what we think is going to happen in the future, let alone 30 or 40 years' time, on any one individual that's not recognized by the scientific community as gospel.
Okay, I'll try to answer all 4 questions as fast as I can. All right, so first of all...
2 minutes and a half.
Okay, so first of all, you're entitled to that opinion. I have my opinion, and I've been involved in this in detail for probably 10 years now, and I've spoken to an equal number probably of scientists, and at some point you believe it or you don't, and based on what you know about science and based on who you're talking to. I absolutely, positively believe it. I think you are looking at this exponential, an unbelievable change, and one of the biggest challenges of our society is that this has not in any way permeated through the way we think about things. Number 2, in terms of entrepreneurs, is it taught or can it be taught or is it learned? And the answer is it's both. So on some level, it is basic. There's that 1%, and that 1% I believe is fixed. You were saying there are more entrepreneurs now? I don't believe there are more entrepreneurs. I believe that number is effectively, it's been historically about 1%. What you're seeing now are people able to express that because you have the other conditions that we were talking, which is what you're talking about now, and that is critical. So it is a spectrum, and absolutely, part of the goal of business schools and entrepreneurship programs are to take people along the spectrum. So somebody who would never think of starting something new might at least work in a startup. Somebody who could work in a startup might actually start their own over there. But this is different from that last air gap 1% who are a fixed portion over time. And so what you're seeing now in the latest things in business school are ways of teaching how entrepreneurs think. Not how to do it, but how do people who are these successful entrepreneurs think. The most recent development is something called effectuation. It's a stupid name for a very interesting assessment of the entrepreneurial process, and you can help people understand how that works, and you can get people there. You can't take somebody from over here and make them jump to be an entrepreneur, but you can, and this is where the policy stuff comes in. It's very, very important. Why is entrepreneurship flourishing here in the U.S. when in much of Western Europe it's not? And the answer is you have societies that are, the conservative societies, long-term culture, are meant to preserve. Here, failure, if it's not celebrated, is certainly tolerated. In much of the rest of the world, if you fail, your family escutcheon is blotted forever. You can never start another company. People, spit on your kids in the street. That's not at all the question here. This is so, and relative to your question about the entrepreneurship versus innovation, one of my one-liners that's been quoted a lot is that any company designed for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st. That gets back to the Kurzweilian factor, which is we are in this exponentially changing world, and if you cannot actually create something new, then you're gonna die. And so therefore, and I really believe that entrepreneurs, yes, absolutely require invention and the creation of something new as the core, but the driving power, the motive power is, I believe, entrepreneurship, and it will create the innovation that it needs to survive.
By the way, 1 second. By the way, although people don't seem to know, Most of Europe has now adopted reforms of the bankruptcy laws that go in the direction of Chapter 11, but the application is very slow. Cultural resistance. Basically, creditors are not ready to exercise their rights, for instance, and the stigma remains. So this situation is changing, but taking in the fastest panel I've ever been into is over.